Thank you, Marcus. One of the scary things that happened to me over the weekend was I saw a tweet from Marcus, and it said about Matt's presentation, it is entirely game-changing. And I thought, I've got nothing to say that's nearly as game-changing as that. But I have, because these figures are entirely game-changing too. I want to talk about the changes that are going to take place in our population. The changes that we've known, the biggest shift we have faced in centuries is the changing shape of our population. That is a shift bigger than anything any of us in our last century have taken part in. These figures are incontrovertible. You can argue about the detail, and you'll find people who will. You can say that it doesn't apply precisely in every community in the UK, and you'll find people who'll say that. You'll more probably find people who'll say, we face a tsunami, we face a time bomb, we face a major crisis. And that's very easy to say. You'll find a government that's recently published a report that suddenly said, my goodness, these figures are really very shocking indeed. We've known about these figures since the baby boom in 1949. We've known these figures were coming our way. And what I want to talk about today is the shift that I think these figures presage, the shift that we have to make happen. Because we can stick to plan A. Plan A is we ignore the figures. We say they'll go away. They probably won't really happen. It might not end up like that. Maybe people will die much more quickly than we think. Maybe medical science will reverse and we won't live as long as these figures suggest we will. We can do that. We can do what I think many of us do. Like children in the playground, put our fingers in our ears, go, la, 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 it's not really happening. We don't want it to happen to us. We can do what I happen to know some civil servants in the Treasury are doing as we speak. Running the figures backwards through the computer, again, trying to see if we can make them change, saying, oh my God, what will it do to our pensions? What will it do to our social care costs? We can worry away about these figures. And if we do that, we face what I think is a real dystopia, a horrific vision of old people living in warehouses, because that's all we'll be able to afford unless we face these figures, of elderly people's accumulated capital clutched to them with nothing to go to the next generation because they'll be too scared, of people living lives of abandonment in the name of autonomy. We'll say they're living independently, but actually they'll be abandoned. And that dystopia will be inevitable if we carry on sticking our fingers in our ears. And I will argue that the cost of doing that is far too great. The waste is enormous, and the risk to all of us is far too big. So let's just imagine for a moment if we really did believe these figures, and I'm telling you they are more or less true. If we really do believe them, what will we do instead? Let's imagine what a city would be like if we really took them seriously. Now, to be flippant for a minute, no city in this country would close their public loos if we really believe these figures. Because we know that people need to go to the loo far more. Every city in this country would have as part of its street scene benches, so people who are tired could sit down and could rest. And all our signs would be legible and readable to all of us. All the directions would be straightforward. But much more than this will need to happen. Because actually these figures allow for a massive rebalancing. These figures tell us what's happening to older people. What the figures need to tell us is actually the population as a whole is changing. And the balance between the younger and the older generation is going to be different. And in 20, 30, 40 years' time, the grandchildren that Matt's bequeathing his fantastic material to will be facing a different balance in their population. And so I think we have the opportunity to reshape the social contract between the generations, to reshape the reciprocity we owe between generations, to understand more clearly the different relationship between the generations. Because it's easy for us to say, these figures are not about them, it's about all of us, because we will all age, whatever the deniers tell you, we will all age, it will happen. And that will change things for us as we get older, but it will change things for the young people who follow us too, because they will be in the minority. Those figures that tell you how many will be over 65 need to also tell you how many fewer there will be under 65. So what will the world look like if this happens, when this happens? The workplace of tomorrow will look different from the workplace of today. It is a commonplace to say we want workplaces that operate as if people and planet matter. We've all heard the cliches, we've all said that. But actually the workplace of tomorrow needs to look very different. We know that retirement is vanishing for all of us. And looking around the room, I suspect that artists and theatre directors, consultants and chief executives and directors are quite pleased to think they can carry on working because they love their jobs and they're interesting. But imagine if you work on the minimum wage. Imagine if you work on a cash point. Imagine if you do one of the grindingly hard physical jobs where your only option is penury if you stop work. We need to reconfigure the workplace to recognise the different skills that people will bring. It is a commonplace, isn't it, to say that just as organisations of the last century had chief operating officers, those of the next century will have chief networking officers. Don't we know that in every shop it is the older people who know who lives around the corner? Don't we know that in every community there are older people who feed those connections and build them? Do we need to create new roles in organisations of counsel, of advice, of support, to complement the drive, the energy, the stamina and the determination that maybe the people in their 30s and 40s will show? Working lives that end in failure because they end when people can no longer keep going are no way, I would argue, to run the workplace of tomorrow. But it's not just the workplace that will have to change, the economy will too. Kristen told us earlier today that manufacturing is no longer going to be a driver in our economy, and I guess most of us in our hearts knew it, although we like to fondly imagine there'll be a return to growth, we'll have masses of manufacturing industry again. But instead we'll have the theme of this conference. We'll have a much more human economy, one in which the dignity of care, the kindness to others, is rewarded in different ways. And regional economic strategies will need to look to the provision of care, the nature of the labour market that provides that care, the dignity of the human touch and its value to society in ways that perhaps in the past we afforded the steelworks and the mines. A new labour market will emerge and will provide a different set of services. 20 years ago, I did some research about the most popular form of domiciliary care. For those of you who don't know, these are the people who come to you at home, help you with your food and clean you up when you are very old and frail, and it will happen to many of us, I can assure you. The most popular in London were young women and young men, Australians on their gap years. The most commonly recruited home helps in London in that time were women in their 50s and 60s who were too tired to do the job. We will have to start looking for new workforces, new ways of operating, because it may well be that all of us, as we grow through our active and energetic 20s and 30s, will give 1 year, 2 years or 3 years to care. It will be something different that we do. We will have to accord that part of the labour market a very different sort of respect. And I think that fits with the theme of this event today, that when shift happens, you humanise. You don't retreat from it, you understand the human connections. We already have within our labour market people who are hugely engaged in care of older people who will never, ever have that title. Many years ago, again, I did some research in Northern Ireland and talked to a whole lot of very lovely old ladies about what kept them going. And they talked about DEC. And they kept talking about DEC, and because I'm a public servant at heart, I assumed it was an acronym. Far from it. Declan, the taxi driver, took them round to the supermarket. Declan, the taxi driver, picked them up when they got lost because they couldn't find their way home. He was never CRB checked. He was never a public servant. He was part of the new prosperity of people who care for each other because they are part of a labour market that recognises these figures are real. And it's my view that just like DEC in Belfast, the community itself will have to change, because if these figures are real, we have a resource that we could not possibly have imagined in the past. We have a resource that can keep an eye on our children, can connect us with our history, can connect us to the skills and talents in our communities. We heard earlier this morning about the advertising campaign run by the British Heart Foundation to persuade people to learn how to restore people whose hearts have stopped. Most children in our country learn a bit about first aid. Nobody in our country learns how to deal with dementia when they first spot it. And yet these figures suggest, as I think we all know, that we're all going to have to learn to deal with this. We're all going to have to know what to do. Currently, the first person who spots somebody suffering early signs of dementia is not a nurse, and it's not a GP, and it's not a social worker. It's the guy running the corner shop who sees that somebody comes in 3 times in the same day and she's never got the right money and her cardigan's inside out, and he starts to worry about what to do. We're going to need to be equipped as a dementia-friendly city, as York aspires to be, to respond to that. We're going to have to be able to respond to the appalling loneliness that these figures suggest older people will feel unless we can do something about it, unless we can connect back to our capacity to share and to make those connections, so that you're not in the place that somebody said to one of our workers who works in our loneliness field, the only people who ever talk to me are the people who are paid to do so. If we end up there, we are nowhere near the good society that we have the huge potential to create. And finally, I think our communities will have to change because we will have this fantastic resource of civil leadership. We will have people who've been around before. Under the last Labour government, a white paper was published which incensed me beyond belief. It said we had to get rid of all the older people who were clogging up council places and that what we needed was more young people among the councillors. Of course we need more young people active, but the skills and resource that we hold in this percentage of the population we throw away at our peril. And in the community of tomorrow, I believe we will have care homes that will look entirely different. They will be turned inside out. The dread destination that I bet, and I won't ask for a show of hands, but we all dread the thought of going to a care home. We dread the thought of one of the people we love ending up in one. And frankly, we never ever go to one if we can possibly help it. In the care home of tomorrow, because of these figures, we will have to turn those institutions inside out. It will be the place you take your sleeping baby who yells all night, because there will be people there who know how to soothe a sleepless baby. We will go there because when we come out of hospital and we need some convalescent care, you can go in for a few days, and that's how we will keep our independence. We will build a new prosperity in our communities around those resources that currently have big walls around them, and therefore experience abuse and horror all too frequently. Our care homes are part of the prosperity that our communities can foster if we can turn them inside out in the way Kirsten was talking about today and make them the place you go to learn, to understand, and to think a bit more about your future. This conference has been about all the shift that's happening. And I want to end with some challenges to the technological and design and theatrical shift that we've talked about. Because if these figures are ones that you believe, and I'm telling you that you need to, which is why I've left the slide up for the whole time, we will need to do things so differently. Currently, I need my reading glasses to read my texts. I'm on the young side of these figures. This is ludicrous. Where are we going if we have to put on our reading glasses in order to send a text? We will need an entirely new approach to that technology, which is currently experienced by older people as a means of surveillance, not a means of empowerment. The fantastic changes that new technology has wrought should provide a platform for empowerment, a neutral platform in which older people can express their demands, can express their concerns. It can be immediately accessible. Touchscreen technology has changed so much. And yet, to date, we use it as a way of tagging people who are mentally ill or suffering from dementia to make sure we know where they are. I occasionally go to conferences where you hear about the power of technology to spot what's happening to people. We are on the foothills of exploring what a different form of technology would be, which would enable older citizens to take part, an active, developing part in society, from which all of us would benefit. And it's not just the new technologies, it's the design of everything. Why do hearing aids look so ugly? Why does everybody, once they start needing a walking stick or a wheelchair, bemoan the fact that they don't look as glamorous as they did before? Where is the new business drive that says, actually, this may be a worry, it's also a fantastic opportunity? And arts and culture, too, will need to adapt, not to provide dumbed-down services for people, not to provide amateur dramatics in some care homes, nice though that might be for some people, but in the way that Pilot have done with Clocking In and Blood and Chocolate, to harness the power of reminiscence, to recognise that reminiscence isn't a tool of social work, and it's all too often used as that, or a nice addition to some theatrical production, but actually the memories of older people are what will guide us all in our much more uncertain future as shift happens. Thank you.